Hi YouTube, today I'm going to show you how to make a leather sheath for a fixed blade knife with a guard, the way I like making the sheaths for my hunters and everyday carry type knives. I start with plain old leather from Tandy. I buy it by the side, so a half a cow at a time. When it comes in a big old roll, so I usually set up a table and cut the sheaths I'm going to be working on out that way. Now today, in the interest of keeping the video as short as I can and yet keeping everything I want to get in there, um, I've got 4 different sheaths with 4 different knives that we're working on, and I've got it staged about as well as I can to keep things moving, so you're not waiting to watch me stitch up a sheath or watching wet leather dry, because that stuff's really boring. But anyways, so you'll take your piece of leather and you'll put the tip of the knife, 3/4 of an inch or so away from the edge, and the tip of the guard about the same distance from the edge of the leather. And then roll the blade over. Then I usually grab a ruler and I go about 3/4 of an inch or so away from the guard, and then add some and then cut. The welt I make from scraps, like the extra pieces from the big roll of leather, just to save as much leather as I can. And you take that knife and you put it up next to that piece of scrap leather. You draw an outline of the blade, including the guard, the cam, and the throat of the sheath, and then draw a rough outline of what the sheath is, the profile of the sheath is going to look like. So first what we're going to do is we're going to wet form this sheath. It'll make it an awful lot easier in the next steps to follow if we do that. Now, I'll talk while I'm moving the camera here. I used to do my wet forming of the sheaths with water, and that worked pretty good, except for, water takes a heck of a long time to dry. So, you would set your piece of leather up in between your boards, wet it down with water, and then close the jaws on your vise and sit there and wait a half a day while the water's evaporating. In one of the knife making books, I think by Jim Hiroshilus, sorry I probably butchered that, he suggested using acetone. And acetone works really well. It wets the leather down, you can wet form it, and then keep it that way for 10-15 minutes, and it's already dried, the acetone's evaporated, it hasn't harmed the leather, at least doesn't seem to. Anyway, so I just go ahead and pour some acetone in here. And my can's almost out. Excuse me, it is out. Got just enough to do this sheath. Now I put the jaws of the vise over where just the blade portion is going to be, because that's where we want it formed the most. Go ahead and clamp that down. Just snug, not too tight. You're not trying to damage the leather. But I do that, let it set for 15 minutes. Now we can fast forward to one of those, while I'm waiting for that to dry, I guess. While you're waiting for that to dry, you can go ahead and trim your welt. Now this blade has got a slight recurve in it. It's supposed to be there, don't worry. But, so our drawing has a slight recurve in there also. The recurve in the blade is fine, the recurve in the welt is not. If we don't get rid of that extra bit of leather there, then the knife will be cutting into that welt each and every time we place the knife in the sheath or remove it. So, when we make our cut here, what we'll do is we'll go along our pencil line, around to where that recurve starts, and then we'll start veering away from that line and cut it straight. And then cut that piece off. Now, when that knife goes down into the sheath, that recurve section won't be there, so we won't have to cut that. Now we take our mark here. I don't know if you can see that or not. And then place our hole punch right at the tip of that guard and punch it. That gives us a hole right where the tip of that guard's going to be. That's much more precise than trying to cut it out with a knife. Then we go ahead and we cut in where the guard will rest against the welt. Free that up. And then we're going to start our cam action here. We're going to go ahead and cut that out, and then we're going to cut this straight back so it stays out of the way. So you can already kind of see, if you line them up right, that is how that knife is going to sit inside the sheath. Okay, now since we're waiting for that other one to dry, we're going to fast forward. Get our drilling block, a preformed piece of leather that I did earlier today, the knife that we're working on here, and the welt for that knife. What we're going to do is position that knife inside what is to become the sheath as tight as we can, and then fold it over. Now we're going to take a couple of regular old nails, drive that one in at the tip, and then we're going to come up to the throat of the sheath and line it up with as high as we want it on the handle. About there. Then we're going to eyeball it from the side, looking inside the welt, and then line it up with that. Adjust it a little bit if we have to. Drive that nail in. Now we're going to pull it out. Pull this nail out just slightly to where you can see what's going on in there. Grab the butt of the knife and give it an up and down movement. I was way off. So the welt needs to go farther in here to tighten that fit up. So we'll open this up, push that welt in with our thumb, put the nail in to where it grabs a new bite, tack it down just a little bit, check, make sure everything's good, pull it out. Now that's a nice fit up right there. Okay, now with the knife still in, sandwiched in between the sheath, we're going to take, this is a new knife I got from KWB, and we're going to use the welt as a guide to trim the outside of the profile of the sheath. And I'm cutting through 2 thicknesses of leather here, so it, and of course even with the knife in the sheath, it still wants to walk on you a little bit. And then just finish the cutout. Okay, now we've got the rough profile of our sheath. So now we can take the knife out of the sheath, set it off to the side. We're going to want to grab our stitch scriber, and then take this over to the grinder to rough shape it. there's the grinder. This is set up with a fresh 36 grit belt. I'm going to throw my floppy hat on so that I don't get leather all over everything. And first of all, what we're going to do is just smooth up the profile a little bit. Then we're going to set our scriber to the distance in between the outside edge of the leather and line it up with the center of that nail. Then we'll grind it until it fits equally on both sides. Maybe take a little bit of this belly out some. And then we're not actually going to scribe the line. What we'll do is we'll just tilt it up a little bit so that it doesn't cut, and then run and make sure that the line where our stitching is going to go is pleasant to the eye, and it's where it needs to be. So we fire up the grinder. I normally grind everything wet except for sheaths, because it just takes, if you run your grinder wet when you're grinding sheaths, then it just takes too long for the leather to dry out after you're done. Okay, that's about all we need at that point. So back to the bench. Okay, we're back at the bench. We'll go ahead and tap these nails in so that it doesn't move on us. Grab our cutter, and we're going to cut where the stitching is going to go. Cut it all the way back. Then you can lift up your sheath just a little bit and then just lightly scribe a line inside on that welt to make sure. I'll open this back up for you. To make sure our stitching is going to be far enough away from the point of where the guard is. This one's a hair on the long side. It could be moved over about another 1/8 of an inch or so, but it's okay. Okay, so we got our line down. Now we're going to take our stitch wheel. It's got little points there, and it rotates to let you know where your holes need to be. We're going to back it up to the nail at the throat of the sheath. Place it down, and then just follow our groove. And now we have marked where our holes need to be. You can use a punch to mark these holes, or you can just use a drill press. This is the one I use. I've got it set up to run a little on the fast side. That way that drill bit actually cuts a clean hole clean through, you know, and the leather doesn't just move out of the way. And that'll make your stitching job later go an awful lot nicer. One thing that I do like about using the stitch wheel is that if you can eyeball it, and you can get pretty close to nice even stitches like that. But by using this, if you decide later you want to add a loop for a ferro rod, you can just use that same wheel and your stitches will line up pretty well. So anyhow, here, like I said, I got the drill set up to go almost as fast as it can. It's just a 5-speed drill press. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the sheath and the welt in place with my index finger, and I'm going to drill 5 holes right about in here. And I'm going to put a nail in the center hole, and that way that welt, it stiffens it up so it can't move, and I'm not having to press so hard with my index finger to keep everything in place. So now I'm going to drill from here up to about here, put another hole or another nail in, drill from here to the second to the last hole, because the head of the nail will run into the chuck. So if you try to do it that way, the head of that nail will kind of throw your drill bit off sideways. This is a pretty thin drill bit. I think it's 3/32. And then do the same thing from here, second to the last hole, drill up a ways, put a nail in. Drill up a ways, put a nail in, drill the rest of the way, and then we'll stop there. That sound you got right there, that was the nail head hitting the chuck. I didn't have my drill bit set in there tight enough, and it slipped a little bit. So now we'll move these last holes. The very tip hole and the very throat hole, I like to keep those the nail diameter instead of drilling them out any, because the thread's only going to go through those holes once on the throat to go across, and then it'll go through twice on the tip, once to stitch it and then once to secure the thread. And you just get a better fit of the hole to the thread if you just leave that hole nail size instead of drilling it out. Okay, now we can pop our sheath off. Make sure that we went all the way through on all our holes. Now I'm going to move you back here. Okay, now we got to mark the sheath. So what we'll do here is we'll just open up half of it. Take our pencil, and we're going to mark where the welt is and where the guard is. Then we're going to count back 5 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and make a mark there. Now we're going to pull these nails out. And then line them back up onto the other side. Do the same thing, mark the inside of the welt, And then on this side, we're going to count 4 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Then also, since this is going to be a right-handed sheath, when the welt is on the right-hand side of the future sheath, you see where that welt is, or where the guard's going to rest? We're going to make a mark just above that, and then carry it through to the other side. Take our nails out, set our welt off to the side. With that particular blade, like I said, we're doing 4 knives, so we need to keep everything in order. Now we're going to take a ruler and line it up about a 1/2 inch above the throat holes and mark ourselves a line there. Bring it back up here, go to where the end of your stitching is, and mark a little curve there and a little curve there. Then we're going to take a large hole punch, place it on that, punch a hole there, punch a hole there. Now the reason that I punch holes here instead of just cutting right up to it is because that hole is nice and round on the inside edge. If you cut right up to it and your knife goes in just a little bit deeper when you, on one side, when you make that 90, that can cause a tear to start right there. But by punching that hole first and then just cutting up to the edge of the hole, you have a nice radius on the inside there that'll be nice and strong. So now you just go ahead and cut along your lines, and you can tell that I cut this a little bit too long. I'm going to waste a little bit of leather, but that's okay. I'll use the leather for padding on a vise or something. Go ahead and cut this. I like to cut these at a slight angle. You know, a slight angle this way instead of straight out. Now, most belts, at least most casual wear belts, are 1.5 inches wide. I believe dress belts, not that I wear a dress belt very much, are mostly 1 inch wide. And then heavy-duty gun belts and tactical belts are 2 inches wide. I usually like to make my belt loops sized to fit 1.5 inch belt, which it just so happens that this ruler is 1.5 inches wide. So we can double check that it's going to fit on most belts there. Then we need a nail, and remember that mark that we made? Well, now we need to punch our nail in just a little bit below that. Take our smaller punch, punch 2 rivet holes, pull our nail out, double check that our holes are going to cause the rivet to be below where the guard's going to sit. Put 2 rivets in there just to check for our spacing. Put the 3rd rivet in just to double check that our spacing is right. Get all the way through, and then draw yourself a little smiley face. Smiley face. Now we can get rid of our rivets. And we're going to cut that piece of leather off. Now we're going to check, see how much time we have left. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Now we're going to go ahead and go bevel the edges of our soon-to-be sheath on the little bitty 1x42 grinder. Sorry, I hope I'm not making you too dizzy there. Okay, we're going to bevel this, round this off real nice, and then bevel this edge and bevel this edge. The reason we do that is if you do not bevel this edge, when you go to start using that sheath, your guard will catch on that 90-degree corner and it'll try folding it over, and it'll be much harder to sheath your knife for the first 20 times than what it should be. By beveling that edge, it gets rid of that, makes it a nice smooth transition into the sheath. By beveling this edge right here, that makes it easier to get your belt through the loop. By beveling this edge here, if you're ever wearing it and this portion right here goes above your belt and above your jeans, it can, dig into your skin and it'll be uncomfortable. So by rounding this off, it makes it a little bit more comfortable. Nice and beveled. Nice and beveled there. Excuse me, nice and beveled there. Now back to the bench. And now all that's left to do is dye the sheath. I like using this leather dye. That's my favorite color for sheaths. Shake it up a bit. Grab you a dauber. Now this part right here won't ever be seen by anybody again. The rest of it, I like to go in an angular pattern with the dye and leave some streak marks in there. When you go to wax this, it'll darken the sheath up a bit more. Those streak marks will be a little bit less noticeable, but you will see them, and I really like the look. Okay, now that that's dyed, go ahead and put our hook in there. And hang it up to dry on the gambrel. Now we're out of time, so I'll shut the camera down and start another video.